Today, joined by a special guest, a return to all Steelers talk. The one, the only Derrick Bell. Find him on Steelers Now, their NFL draft expert, his YouTube channel, youtube.com/DB. Am I correct on that one, or am I
Yeah, slash
off?
Steelers_DB. You got it,
Yeah,
though.
that was close. And anywhere else that you're really looking for NFL draft content, the best in the business. Excited to have you back, brother. This is an exciting day for me. How you feeling? How's people are wondering, dude, how's life? It's been a minute since me and you've been on camera together.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. Of course, we saw each other a couple months ago, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to be back. I'm really excited to jump on here. It is my favorite time of the week, just with the NFL draft, like right around the corner, man. It's like months and months of preparation, kind of all culminating and concluding with this really exciting weekend. So I know it's going to be extremely busy for both of us, but I'm really looking forward to it. I know the fan base is extremely excited, and I'm excited to be back on the channel to talk some ball with you.
Yeah, 100%. So I will start off with this one. Before we got on, you were saying you were wrapping up your big board that's going to drop on Steelers Now.
Mhm.
Give everybody one name, not the biggest surprise, but a bit of a surprise that you think might be on your board. Give somebody a little bit of a teaser here.
Yeah, I think there are a couple names. I feel like this has been one of the years where I've kind of differed from consensus a little bit more than usual at the top of the draft.
Yeah.
It's not an extremely talented top of the first round. There aren't a lot of blue chip caliber players, so that's going to make, I think, the varying rankings pretty different across the league as well. But just some guys that I think I'm like higher on in the consensus when you talk about like first round caliber players. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, defensive tackle. He's a guy that I'm pretty high on.
Ooh.
He's inside my top 10. Another
Whoa.
guy that I'm pretty high on. I'm not really sure of where he exactly is in the consensus boards, but I think he's like more towards like the 20s range. Is Ohio State left tackle Josh Simmons. I'm a really big fan of Simmons. I think he has all the tools to be a franchise caliber left tackle at the next level. He's someone that a different stylistic player than a guy like Amarius Mims, who I liked a decent amount, but I could see him providing really good value to a team similar to Mims, where I felt like over the second half of the season, really the last month, Mims came into his own because like he was a lot more polished than people really gave him credit for last cycle. I kind of get that same vibe from Simmons, and it seems like the medical rechecks and stuff for him went really well. So I know we're going to talk a lot probably about Walter Nolan just as it relates to the Steelers, but Josh Simmons would be the other guy that I think I'm higher on in the consensus.
I'm very excited to see where Walter Nolan falls, because we've had others on this podcast that
Very polarizing.
very polarizing player, and I'm not going to have you go too deep. We'll save it for this week when it comes out, but I am excited to check out that when it does drop. It'll drop on Steelers Now this week. All right, let's dive into the draft here. It's draft week. It's your week. You've spent, I've said it probably 30 times on the show in the last 2 months. Anytime somebody's like, oh, because you'd be shocked how many people come on the show and reference you. Lots, actually. And every time I'm like, oh yeah, if I have I just look to Derrick's work because that's where it goes. We're here. It's draft week. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been linked everywhere. Quarterback, running back, defensive tackle, wide receiver, which I've heard that Matthew Golden is a name to watch in your eyes. We'll get to that in a second. Potentially random names like Nicky Muware. There's been, Gray Zabel was a name that was dropped on me during the Senior Bowl. And every time I talk to any source inside that building, he's a name that continues to come up. I'm like, why? Doesn't make any sense for an offensive tackle unless they're thinking Broderick isn't the guy. But we're here. We're 3 days away from the NFL draft. And I think everybody's wondering the same thing. If you were the Steelers, what would your advice be? Or if you were a draft expert, a draft analyst talking to Pittsburgh, what would your advice to the Steelers be? So I want to ask you, best draft mind I know, what is your advice to the Pittsburgh Steelers this week?
Yeah, I kind of have 3 bullet points of things that I would like for them to do or avoid doing. I think number 1 is pretty simple. Don't reach on a quarterback. I completely understand the need at the position, how important it is to like long-term success in the National Football League. At the same time, this isn't a great quarterback class. The only guy that would be available at 21 that I would even consider, depending on how the board fell, would be Shadir Sanders. Sanders, there is a lot to like in terms of like from the neck up. There is a polish to his game. I love the accuracy to the first and second level. He's extremely tough, willing to push the ball down the field. I think he processes defenses pretty well, rarely fooled, takes care of the football. The athletic tools kind of limit the upside of the ceiling a little bit, in my opinion, lacks the drive velocity that you ideally want. Yeah. He has good creative instincts, but he doesn't necessarily create extremely well out of the pocket just because he's a little limited in terms of like speed, agility, the quick twitch elements. But just don't reach on a quarterback. The Jackson darts, I understand like Jalen Milroe is kind of like the lottery ticket, but even at 21, that's a little bit rich for my blood. So those guys, I would try to stay away from those. And then the other two things are pretty simple in terms of they need to start a contingency plan long term for eventual post Cam Hayward defensive trench work. They got to find a defensive tackle. They need a starter really this year, somebody that can contribute right away. This is an excellent class to do it. I had a dozen interior defensive linemen in my top 100 on my big board. It is a rich class. You want a 0 tech, a 3 tech, pass rusher, run clock, or whatever you want, you can get in this class. And then the last thing what I would say is just try to add some type of explosive element to the offense. I think that could come in the form of a running back. It seems like a lot of the running backs they've been linked to pre-draft visits, speedsters, explosive play generators, guys like that. They already kind of did that a little bit with DK Metcalf. I think that Jaylen Warren will look more like he did 2 years ago if he's able to stay healthy. And I'm excited about pairing another running back with him to kind of combine those skill sets. But I would just say like the last thing is just try to figure out a way to get more explosive plays. Najee Harris was a really solid back, but wasn't a guy who created a ton of like explosive plays in the run game. So if you can find a way to get somebody that can do that, especially off outside zone, I'm all for it.
If you are the Steelers, at what point are you looking at a running back? Because they brought in guys. I mean, they brought in Omarion Hampton. They brought in Trey Henderson. I would imagine they have interest in Judkins, and obviously they brought in Caleb Johnson. Ashton Jeanty falls, there's no question, but he's not going to make it outside of top 6.
Yeah.
Where are you looking for a running back? Because I mean, there are guys in the 4th, maybe the 5th round that have upside, but I don't know if the upside meets, like you could get a Hampton or a Henderson that have, you know, people are talking Jahmyr Gibbs upside and those guys. Yeah. Where are you looking?
Yeah, it seems like the league really loves Trevion Henderson based on what I understand. I'm probably not in the first round territory with Henderson. I do really like what he brings to the table in terms of a pass catcher, awesome pass protector as well. Yeah. You mentioned Omarion Hampton. If they were able to somehow come away with another second round pick, I would pick Caleb Johnson in that category. I think Johnson is an outstanding scheme fit. Tons of outside zone work against Iowa. He has like next level type of vision in terms of finding cutback lanes and things like that. He's another guy who created a lot of explosive plays, even though like people are really hung up on the 40 time. Mm-hmm. But like you mentioned, the interior defensive tackle class, I would say interior defensive tackle, running back, and edge. And it's difficult with edge because there aren't usually a lot of day 3 players that go on to have good NFL careers just because if it's an athletic based position. But those 3 positions are ones where you can go into the 4th round, and I think there's going to be really good contributors, man. Like baseline starter types with upside. These the tackles, like I really like CJ West from Indiana, Jamari Caldwell from Oregon. They had him in for a pre-draft visit. If those guys get to the 4th round, I would be really big fans of that pick. You mentioned running backs. Guys like Bashal Tootin and Jaden Blue, explosive play generators. Tootin has a lot of outside zone experience. Blue was a guy who ran primarily outside the tackles at Texas. And then, I don't see them going to need an edge rusher, but there are a couple like day 3 edge rushers that I'm like fringe top 100 guys that I look at. I'm like, man, I'd love to have this dude in the black and gold. So, yeah, the depth of this class, especially at some of the positions of their like where their needs fall, really matches up well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think defensive tackle, quarterback is really the only one. Your thoughts on the wide receiver class? Because you said explosive, and I think there's a ton of upside in Matthew Golden, Emeka Egbuka, who seems to be a question mark. Like, outside of that, is there anybody that you're grabbing that? Because the big thought at wide receiver is at some point, what if they have to trade George Pickens? Which right now they'd like to keep him. They don't get to determine that if he doesn't show up to training camp. So if they do walk away, like where is that line for you at wide receiver where it makes sense compared to, all right, you just got a 5th wide receiver and you don't need that guy?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of smart analysts and draft folks, talk about like there's no such thing as a bad wide receiver class. And I do agree to an extent, but this is a below average crop of players. I feel like there is a pretty significant dip in terms of like my top 5 or 6 guys into like the day 2 guys, honestly, but it kind of does depend on like what archetype you're searching for. You mentioned Matthew Golden. The verticality, the burst off the ball
Yeah.
tracking with the ball in the air. He plays bigger than his size suggests. He's got the in-out quicks, good route runner, can separate. There's a lot to like with Matthew Golden. He would be a guy that I would consider in round 1 if he was there. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. It seems like the league's pretty high on him. You mentioned Emeka Ibuka. There's just a lot. There's a lot to like with Ibuka's game, man. Like he's just so dependable, so quarterback friendly, works back to the ball extremely well, finds a soft spot in zones, and also like as a blocker, like. The dude, I compared him to Robert Woods. He was one of my favorite players coming out of USC when I first got into like the draft, like putting my thoughts out on Twitter, like not writing about it. But he reminds me a lot of Robert Woods, and people will remember like Woods for his days and with the Rams, and he was a really good player, man, early in his career. So that's kind of the guys that I would probably look at earlier. Now, if like they got to the 3rd round and they still hadn't picked up a receiver, they want like some type of George Pickens contingency plan. Or somebody to maybe complement that. A guy like Savion Williams out of TCU is really intriguing. There's a lot of upside present there. He is a little bit of an older prospect, unrefined, unpolished, but makes some jaw-dropping catches at the high point. You know, he can leap extremely well. He's really creative with the ball in his hands. They put him in the backfield sometimes. There's been Cordarrelle Patterson comp. So, you know, I think he's going to be Arthur Smith's like favorite player in the draft. But he's somebody that you just got to find. Like he does get off press coverage like better than maybe you'd expect for like this kind of, I would say, archetype of player, like what people refer to as gadgety. But there's a lot to like. He's got really good balance. He's strong. So I do think there's upside there, but he's going to be somebody that you're going to have to bring along a little bit slowly because I don't think he's really nearly close to being a finished or refined product.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. I put out a mock draft yesterday, just a hypothetical. Like, what if Aaron Rodgers doesn't end up in Pittsburgh? How should the Steelers approach this? And he was my pick in the 3rd round, actually. The 3rd round. And I agree with you. Like, if you're going to replace George Pickens eventually, which I don't want to think that way, but you have to think that way if you're the Steelers. Contingency plans. And if that's the case, like just like you said, his high point is the closest to George Pickens in this draft class, like where it's defined enough, where everything else is defined enough, where you could say, all right, if this guy's got to play 60% of the snaps his rookie season, it works out. But I agree with you. Where's the cutoff? Like, is he the last name on your list where it's like, okay, after this, it's not there anymore?
You know, it's kind of tough because they haven't really shown like a ton of interest in terms of pre-draft visits. The other guys that they brought in, the Iowa State guys, Jaylen Null, he's the guy who you talk about burst off the ball. This dude can really roll. He's a straight line speedster. He reminds me a little bit of Christian Kirk out of Jacksonville. I think he's with the Texans now. Some similar type of play with Null. He can track the football well down the field. The one thing that I think I don't see as much as other people would know is I just don't think he's as great of a separator underneath, and he doesn't offer you a lot of yards after catch. So I kind of wonder like what his role is going to be at the next level, and if there's enough value in that role to warrant taking him in the 2nd round, which is like where I feel like a lot of people are mocking him these days. Jaden Higgins, you mentioned like another big body threat, maybe somebody that could potentially replace Pickens if you want to go that route. But he's automatic on back shoulders. Like he has magnets for hands, catches pretty much everything thrown in his vicinity. He's like kind of a rhythmic route runner. He's really calculated in his steps. The problem with Higgins is like there's a lot of guys hanging on his back all the time. He just doesn't separate. He doesn't have nearly the explosiveness that showed up. Like the explosiveness in his testing numbers really doesn't show up on film. And he kind of gets by with more like nuance and savvy. I actually wonder if like a big slot role for him is actually better than him playing X, which is like where Pickens is played with the Steelers. But, you know, it's not one of those classes that you're going to feel great about in terms of getting somebody that can be an instant contributor if you select them on day 3. Could it happen? Sure. I'm not as bullish on this as years past.
No, I agree. I definitely agree. All right, let's talk another position. Today, Adam Schefter dropped this bad boy, which comes after so much more. He said in his week of the draft insight, quote, sources said that the Steelers had not been planning to draft a quarterback in round 1, but they also were not expecting Shedeur Sanders to fall out of the top 10. Now, all options seem to be on the table, and they are preparing in case they have the option to draft Sanders. So Sanders came in for a pre-draft visit. I think that kind of stunned everybody because it was a lot of hypotheticals. It was a lot of, they probably have interest in Shedeur Sanders, but we're guessing on what that level of interest is. Then it came out. I mean, I've been told, I'm sure you've been told, they really like Shedeur Sanders.
Yep.
I don't know if that means that they're going first round with a quarterback. I have a hard time believing that they are, even if it is Shedeur Sanders. I personally think he's the only one out of the group outside of Cam Ward. If, pigs flew and the NFL draft got real chaotic in Green Bay, they wrote the wrong name down or something.
Yeah.
Shedeur would be the only guy they took in round one. Outside of that, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck. You said Jalen Milroe, who seems to be a big question mark. You could go as deep as Will Howard was the name to watch for like months. Now he's not. I've been told they really like Quinn Ewers. I have no idea how to feel about that one.
I know how you should feel about that one.
Yeah, like it's not good. Nobody should feel good. Kyle McCord came in for a visit. There are all these names. If you're the Steelers, I have a feeling you're not going to say first round. I don't think that's the place to go. Where are you looking for a quarterback? Where's your quarterback for the Steelers? Because they are probably going to draft one.
Yeah, it is tough because they are going to draft one. I think that you just see the writing on the wall, whether it's in round one or not. Will Howard to me just seems like a Steelers-y quarterback.
Not to Mason Rudolph today.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think it was a couple months ago. I actually tweeted out. Somebody asked me my thoughts on him, and I said that he kind of reminds me of Mason a little bit in some ways. With Howard, like he went on this like Linsanity run down the college football playoffs in terms of like just the way that he was playing. He's a really tough player. He gives you a little bit in the red zone as a runner. I do think that accuracy, especially at like the second level, he knows when to like take some touch off. Really good on crossers, things like that. Him and Abuka seem to have a really good connection there. My thing with Howard that I think is it scares me a little bit when we're talking about college quarterbacks translating to the next level is when he gets pushed off this spot, I just feel like everything goes downhill. And that's just kind of the nature of playing quarterback in the NFL. The pockets get really muddy. You're going to have to navigate through traffic. I just thought everything from his mechanics, his decision-making kind of went downhill after he got pushed off his spot. With Milroe, kind of mentioned him earlier, total lottery ticket. I would be interested in getting him on the second day of the draft. Like if he did last until, say like the late second round, like if they were able to trade back, I think if they were able to trade back maybe to like 32, 34 range, they might be able to pick up like the 65th pick. If he was there at that point, I'd be interested in selecting him. It just seems like he's going to go earlier than that, just based on the needs that teams have around the league for quarterbacks. Everybody's thirsty for one. With Milroe, he's just a dynamic athlete, like one of the best athletes we've ever seen at the position. Like there's never been a pursuit angle that he can't destroy. And that's kind of like the way that I've described his like rushing ability. As the passer, it's really all deep balls, but he does show good touch. I thought there was some nice things in terms of his improvement in the pocket, cutting down on the sacks, things like that. But the floor is just so low with him. And it's really frustrating because you'll see some highs and then you'll see some really dangerous lows where he just looks unplayable. Another guy's going to need to sit. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think my personal preference would be like if you could hold off until like the fourth round and just try to get a backup. Because I do think that this class, I would be really surprised if this class gave us more than like, I'll say more than two starting quality players.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are like an unusual amount of backup quarterbacks or developmental pieces. One of the guys that I kind of like is Max Brosmer from Minnesota, a guy who's like played a good amount under center. He's deadly in the intermediate area. The field throws to the middle, can really pace people over there. Throws with good anticipation, something that's really lacking across a lot of these profiles. But he's somebody that I think is going to go in like the 6th, 7th round and probably have like a 10-year career just because he knows what to do with the football, even if he doesn't have any ability to create with his legs.
Yeah, I agree. I've said that the entire draft process is this draft evens out like right on that 4th round mark where it's just like, all right, talent meets pick. Here we go. This is what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's I kind of think that's my thing is like, I think if I was the Steelers, I understand you have to take one just because the nature of where the depth chart sits, and they've kind of bungled this whole like quarterback search, honestly, in my opinion. But if a guy like McCord or a guy like Will Howard was there at the 4th round, like I would really be excited about that because they are both players that have played a lot of ball. I think that you saw that translate over the last couple of years. Guys that play a lot of college ball are really experienced, tend to have a little bit smoother of a transition. That's the way like old school front offices used to view this spot. Is they used to want 3-year starters. Now, with the amount of underclassmen we were getting guys drafted in the 1st round with like 300-400 passing attempts. And like a lot of those guys haven't panned out. But guys like Howard, guys like McCord could be players that say if you do go into the season with Mason Rudolph and the Aaron Rodgers thing falls through, whatever that saga, however that unfolds, guys like Howard, McCord could probably come in, and you might be able to give them like a 6 to 8 game audition and just see if there's anything there. I don't necessarily think that they're starting quality talents, but you could give them an audition and then go into 2026 with all of those comp picks and all the draft capital and ammo necessary to move up and get a guy that you're really sold on.
What's your, because that's the big question, and you just said it. Everybody talks. Why would you wait? Why would you want to wait to 2026? Can you explain in your thought why you'd wait till 2026?
Yeah, I mean, everybody and their mom has asked me about like my thoughts on the 2026 class.
My mom's also curious. She told me she texted me to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting like texts, DMs about 20. I have had, I would call, secondhand exposure to a lot of the quarterbacks just because of grinding tape on their teammates throughout this process. I would be doing everybody a disservice if I gave very firm opinions on any of them because I just haven't seen them outside of live viewings and like looking at their teammates. But there are guys that I think are just dripping with traits. I would say that maybe more so than this class where you're talking about a guy like Shedeur Sanders, who has kind of middling traits and is going to need to be a different player in the league than he was necessarily in college. And I am sort of intrigued to see if he can actually do that. But I think the big thing just goes back to what I said on the onset about the goals for the Steelers in this draft. Don't reach on the quarterback just because you need one. I understand you got to keep taking swings, but just make sure it's a justified one, that there's either some sort of development or developing prospect that you're excited about and fits your offensive scheme well, or somebody with at least the traits to pay off that investment. And I think that's where I differ from a lot of the draft analysts or just a lot of people in general with a guy like Jackson Dart. I love how charismatic he is. He's tough as nails. He throws with great touch, especially like intermediate areas, sail routes, crossers. He can really get the ball up and down, but I just don't necessarily think he's not necessarily as athletic as a runner to be a true dual threat. And I also just don't see like the arm talent that I think a lot of other people do. I think it's just really like mostly average. So he wouldn't be a guy that I would just like feel really comfortable about taking in the first round, knowing that he's going to have a tough transition outside of that system.
I agree. I look at it and just say sometimes the risk of waiting till next year, the patience is worth the reward. And that's where the Steelers kind of sit, where they might not sit and where they might kind of be a little urgent on his defensive tackle. That's the next position.
I will say this. Yeah, I will say this too. Even though I mean, I'm out here grinding like day 3 safeties and edge rushers over the past like weekend, just trying to finalize my big board. I will say this because I know a lot of people are probably wondering, but NFL teams do look a year ahead in terms of ranking quarterback class. So like there is like scouting departments. Typically what happens is, the road scouts are done with their reports by the time the season ends, right? Because all the games are pretty much done aside from the college football playoff. And like those guys, once that process is over, you're getting early feedback and looking at the top guys for next year. So at this point in the cycle, the coaches and the general managers in the front office, the head honcho decision makers are all in on putting their fingerprints on their draft board this year. But your actual like national scouts and stuff, like they're already kind of got an eye ahead on next year's class. It just at least about the big guys. So I'm sure they're aware of like what next year's class and have a better feel for it. But we'll see. I don't know. The Steelers could be desperate. I mean, we've seen them do this before, like 2022. Very similar situation. Ended up taking a quarterback that I was pretty low on. And I'm just kind of hoping that they avoid that kind of same mistake this time.
I remember you were like, oh, draft Malik Willis. That guy should go first in the draft. That's actually what I was doing.
Yeah, everybody like weirdly remembers like the context. It's funny. I think it was like a couple months ago, somebody was saying something like chirping me about having Malik Willis as my QB1. And I tweeted him and I was like, do you see my big board? Like he's number 32 on the big board. Like I explicitly said on every single show that you and I did, don't take a quarterback. I was like, please do not do it. Like, don't take a quarterback in the first round. This is not the year to do it. Now, Willis definitely has not, even though things did look promising in short time span in Green Bay last year. He has not panned out. That entire draft class, other than Brock Purdy, who's taking the 7th round. I didn't even get around to scouting him. But yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, please just don't make the same mistake again.
I don't think they are. I think they are a little scared from 2022. And I also
hope
like
so.
the sense I get is talking to Omar at the league meetings just gave me such a strong sense of they are well aware next year's class is good and they're waiting for it. All right, last position I want to talk about here is defensive tackle. That in my eyes is their first round pick. I don't think I've changed that from day one. It depends on who, really, if anybody's there. And Kenneth Grant, Derrick Harmon, Walter Nolan are the three. Mason Graham would be there, but I don't think he's somehow going to fall to 21. You just said Walter Nolan's in your top 10, which is wild. First time I ever heard that one. Is he your guy then? If the Steelers are there, all three of these guys are on the board. Is Walter Nolan the one you're picking? I feel like he's the maybe the biggest upside, but maybe the biggest flop at the same time.
Yeah, there's definitely there's definitely boom or bust potential with Walter Nolan. I think if like you're grading him, he's one of those prospects that I feel like generally speaking, most of the people that I really respect their opinions kind of in the industry, a lot of us come to really similar conclusions on guys' strengths and weaknesses. You may have like small differences here and there, but it really comes down to like your valuation of the player and if you're like what you value more, whether it's traits, upside, like actual production, things of that nature. With Walter Nolan, for me, I look at this draft class and I said at the top that there's just not a lot of blue chip talent. I actually think that Walter Nolan has a lot of untapped potential. And I think that the reason why I was able to the more I watch, the more I like, just because the flashes, there's 2 to 3 reps a game that really like make you jump out of your seat. And then the production was also like pretty good. And there were my nitpicks in his game in terms of my, what I would say, like my negatives and my scouting notes. I keep a Google Drive and I just put bullet points in there after bullet points. All of the negatives really in his profile were things that like, I feel like are fixable. And then if those get fixed, I feel like the strengths just rise even higher than they already are. But, with Nolan, in particular, I just think that there's like a really tantalizing blend of burst, lateral agility, and grown man strength. He's 21 years old. He can like absolutely detonate guards off the line of scrimmage. The hands are really active, and this is kind of where I get into the concerns or the weaknesses in this scouting report. The hands are really active. He just doesn't know what he's doing with them right now. So like if he does refine more of a pass rush repertoire, gets more of a toolkit, that he can really access, puts more moves and counters. He's extremely active, and he's basically winning right now off of like slipping into gaps, the burst off the ball, the ability to cross face as a rusher. There are flashes of him being dominant. It's just not all there. Now, I don't think that I've seen some of the people that are really high on Walter Nolan are talking about him as like a Jalen Carter type in this class, somebody that falls later than he maybe should and maybe gives that immediate type of impact. Jalen Carter was my number 1 player in that draft class. I don't see Walter Nolan as that type of physical freak, but he is the number 9 ranked player on my big board. And I'm not sure if he's even on the Steelers boards because there's some character concerns around his work ethic. And I've talked to a couple scouts while I was in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine when you and I were there, and there were very mixed opinions on him. And I think that there will only be a handful of teams really willing to take that risk in the first round. But in a class that doesn't have a lot of blue chippers, I'd be willing to do it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of the same stuff, is that the Pittsburgh Steelers like him. They like what he does on the field. He's not their first choice because of the character concerns. And to be honest, I think the not working at the combine, the not working at his pro day only hurt that.
It was a red flag for me too.
It was a red flag.
See that.
Yeah. And where they are, is that who if you are the Steelers, do you expect, if all three of them are on the board, who do you expect them to take?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of said since like December that if they wanted to go defensive tackle, I think that there's a good chance that Derrick Harmon is just the number 1 player on the board for them.
Yeah.
Like in terms of defensive tackle. I have not heard this, so this is no inside information. Aggregators, do not put this clip on social media. But I will say this. I think that if you looked at the Steelers board right now, I think Harmon would be number 1. I think that they have him graded over Mason Graham. That's just my opinion. You look at the way that he's built. He's alignment versatile. He does remind me a little bit of Stephon Tuitt, just because he's got a really quality all-around skill set. He's got a wide base. He's got really long arms, really good upper body strength. He's difficult to move off the spot. He's got some juice off the ball as a pass rusher, a solid first step. He can get on blockers' edge. He's really good on twists and stunts. The Steelers could probably use him and free him up a little bit more. Like, he can be the masher, he could be the looper. And then just kind of one of those things that, similar thing with Nolan, who I think plays extremely hard. That's one of the critiques of him that I don't really quite understand. With Harmon, there's a motor that just never stops. And I think if you look over the course of history with the Steelers defensive line, they always have guys that play to the whistle. And Harmon's one of those guys who's going to give you all he has. I think that there are some athletic limitations present with him. He did test a little bit better than I expected. He didn't do the agilities, which I don't think is necessarily a coincidence. There is some like tightness in his lower half that does worry me a little bit. He had like a 27% missed tackle rate, which is genuinely absurd. So that's kind of one of the things that, like, I had an early second round grade on Harmon, but he will be like a top 25 player on the big board for me. I do think he's going to be disruptive because he was disruptive his final year at Oregon after cutting a bunch of weight. I'm just kind of curious on if he's ever going to be truly productive and be able to really turn those pressures into sacks like some of the other players in the class.
Yeah, I agree. All right, I'm going to send you out of here with this one. I got one final question for you, then I'm going to let you plug all your links. We are 4 days away from the NFL draft. First round, 21st pick. No trades. We're keeping it simple. Two guys you think are the Pittsburgh Steelers come Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I'll tell you one that I don't really know if, like, he's not going to be their first round pick. He's going to go on day 3 of the draft, but someone that I'm extremely high on that I think that the Steelers like, they brought him in for a pre-draft visit, and someone that I will be like banging the table for them to get as soon as like Saturday starts is Justin Walley, Minnesota cornerback. He was one of their last pre-draft visitors. He was someone that I got to extremely late in the process, but actually, like, when I finalized my grade, like, he's a top 100 guy. He's like at like 230 on the consensus board. So I think everyone else in the draft media, maybe the NFL too, just thinks that this dude cannot play whatsoever.
Yeah, maybe it's just you.
I watched the dude's tape, and I just can't believe that we're like, I don't necessarily think he has this incredibly high upside where he's going to be a CB1 or a shutdown guy. But I struggle to see too many realities that aren't injury related where he doesn't like make an impact at the next level. I think he can play inside, outside. He's got great functional athleticism. He anticipates routes really well. Tons of experience. I mean, this dude, like, 4-year starter, started over 40 games in Minnesota. They play a role-based NFL-style defense. He was asked to play every technique, every coverage you could possibly ask for. He battled, like I said, the toughness. He played through a partially torn MCL last year. He still was flying downhill to blow up screens and get involved in the run game. He's a relatively solid tackler, but he could be a little bit grabby at the top of routes. Like I said, I don't necessarily think that he's like this generational athlete or anything like that. I do think he has functional athleticism and someone that I think is I just think he's going to be a starter at the next level. I really do believe that. He was my CB10. So Justin Walley would be one. And then they're going to take some quarterback. I think if they take a quarterback in round 1, it'll probably be Shadur. If they take one on day 2, I'm going to say Will Howard in the 3rd round. But those would be kind of my predictions as far as like guys I think are most likely to become Steelers.
I'm all about a guy whose last name is Walley. I'm all about a good last name, and that's as good as it gets. All right. Yeah. With that said, my friend, I'm going to let you head out of here. First, I want to give you a moment. Hit your links wherever everybody could find you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at Steelers_DB on Twitter and on YouTube. You can find all my written work at SteelersNow.com. Tons of positional rankings, draft breakdowns. Nick Martin, All Steelers Talk. My co-host, like, talking a lot about NFL draft over there on my channel. If you guys are interested in that, there's tons of stuff that you can go back in the archives and look to get you prepared for Thursday. And then my big board is going to be coming out sometime in the next 48 hours if I can stop doing as many like radio hits and podcast hits to talk ball with my friends. But I'm excited about this, man. It's my favorite time of year, and any opportunity I get to come on here, talk ball with you, talk ball with the people, I'm really excited to do so. So it's going to be a fun week.